You know what drives me crazy about football conversations? We spend hours debating the same names over and over, while absolute legends get completely ignored. I'm talking about running backs who put up Hall of Fame numbers, changed how the position was played, and carried entire franchises on their shoulders, yet somehow their names barely come up anymore. That's what we're fixing today. Stick around because some of these names are going to shock you, and by the end, you'll be wondering how the hell we've been sleeping on these players for so long. Let's kick this off with number 10, and I'm starting with a guy who should have at least 5 Pro Bowls but only made 1. We're talking about Fred Taylor out of Jacksonville. This dude rushed for over 11,000 career yards, sits 17 all-time on the rushing list, and somehow only got invited to 1 Pro Bowl in 13 seasons. Think about how insane that is. Taylor came into the league in 1998 as the 9th overall pick and immediately went off for 1,200 yards and 14 touchdowns as a rookie. At 6'1" and 228, he had this perfect combination where he could run you over, but also had legitimate breakaway speed. There's a reason he had a 90-yard touchdown run on his resume. Here's what killed Taylor's reputation though. Injuries plagued parts of his career, and people started calling him Fragile Fred. But let me tell you something, from 2002 to 2007, this man played in 87 out of 96 possible games and averaged over 1,200 rushing yards per season. That's not fragile, that's being a workhorse. And it wasn't just the running either. Taylor caught almost 300 passes in his career and was legitimately dangerous in the passing game. The problem was, he played in Jacksonville during an era when small market teams got zero national attention unless they were in the playoffs. Taylor helped get them to 2 AFC championship games, but without a Super Bowl appearance, his individual brilliance got buried. When you actually compare his numbers to guys in the Hall of Fame, he's got more career rushing yards than O.J. Simpson, Jim Taylor, and Larry Csonka. But nobody talks about him in those conversations because he didn't have the primetime spotlight. Coming in at number 9 is Clinton Portis, and this is a guy who exploded onto the scene so hard that people forget just how dominant he was. Portis got drafted by Denver in the 2nd round of 2002 and immediately won Offensive Rookie of the Year with 1,508 rushing yards and 15 touchdowns. Then he came back the next year and rushed for even more, 1,591 yards and 14 scores. 2 years into his career and he's already one of the most feared backs in football. Then Denver trades him to Washington for Champ Bailey in what was one of the biggest blockbuster deals of that era. And Portis just keeps producing. His first year in Washington, he sets a franchise record with 1,315 rushing yards. The next season, he breaks his own record with 1,516 yards and 11 touchdowns. What made Portis special wasn't just the running though. This dude was one of the best pass-blocking running backs of his generation. He would absolutely stone blitzing linebackers to protect his quarterback, which is something that doesn't show up in the stat sheet, but coaches absolutely love. And let's not forget his personality. Portis became a fan favorite in Washington with all those alter egos he'd bring out during press conferences. Sheriff Gonna Getcha, Southeast Jerome, all that stuff made him must-see television. By the time his career was done, Portis had rushed for 9,923 yards and 75 touchdowns with another 2,800 receiving yards. He just barely missed 10,000 career rushing yards, but he had 6 seasons over 1,200 yards, which shows you how consistently elite he was. The problem is, he played on some middling Washington teams, and injuries shortened his prime years. But when he was healthy and rolling, Portis was every bit as good as LaDainian Tomlinson or Shaun Alexander. He just doesn't get remembered that way. Number 8 is Jamal Lewis, and if you want to talk about a throwback power running back, this is your guy. Baltimore drafted him 5th overall in 2000, and as a rookie, he rushed for over 1,300 yards while helping the Ravens win their first Super Bowl behind one of the most legendary defenses ever assembled. Lewis was the perfect complement to that defense because he could just pound defenses into submission, but his signature season came in 2003 when he put together one of the greatest individual campaigns in NFL history. Lewis rushed for 2,066 yards that season, which is still 3rd all-time for a single season. He also set an NFL record with 295 rushing yards in one game against Cleveland, and that record stood until Adrian Peterson broke it a few years later. For that season, Lewis won Offensive Player of the Year, and it was completely deserved. Over his career, Lewis finished with 10,607 rushing yards and 58 rushing touchdowns, plus another 1,800 receiving yards. He had 7 seasons with at least 1,000 rushing yards, which puts him in rare company for consistency. But here's the thing, Lewis played most of his career in Baltimore, where the defense was the story. Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, that whole unit grabbed all the headlines while Jamal Lewis was quietly being the offensive foundation. Then when he went to Cleveland later in his career, he was playing for a struggling franchise that nobody was paying attention to nationally. Lewis's running style was just brutal and punishing. He would wear defenses down over the course of a game, and by the fourth quarter, defenders wanted nothing to do with tackling him. Yet his name almost never comes up when people talk about the best backs of the 2000s, and that's a crime considering he's a Super Bowl champion with a 2,000-yard season on his resume. At number 7, we're going way back to the 1940s and 50s with Marion Motley, and this might be the most underrated player on this entire list. Motley wasn't just an incredible football player, he was a pioneer who helped integrate professional football as one of the first African-American stars of the modern era. Standing 6'1" and 238 pounds, Motley was absolutely massive for a running back in his time, but he also had speed and agility that was unheard of for someone his size. He started his pro career with the Cleveland Browns in 1946 when they were in the All-America Football Conference, and he immediately became the centerpiece of Paul Brown's dynasty. In 4 AAFC seasons, Motley rushed for over 3,000 yards at 6.2 yards per carry and led the league in rushing in 1948. The Browns won all 4 AAFC championships during that stretch. When the Browns joined the NFL in 1950, a lot of people questioned whether Motley could handle the step up in competition. He answered that by leading the entire NFL in rushing with 810 yards at 5.8 yards per carry, and Cleveland won the NFL championship that same year. Here's the most insane stat about Motley though. His career average of 5.7 yards per carry is still the best mark in league history for any running back with more than 1,000 attempts. Nobody in the history of football has been more efficient as a rusher over a full career. Beyond just running the ball, Motley was also an excellent blocker and even played linebacker at times because that's what players did back then. But because he played in an era before widespread television coverage and extensive film archives, his legacy has faded over the decades. Marion Motley wasn't just underrated, he was revolutionary, and his impact on the game deserves far more recognition than it gets. Number 6 is Roger Craig, and if you ask me, this might be the biggest Hall of Fame snub at the running back position. Craig was drafted by San Francisco in the second round of 1983 and became a critical weapon in Bill Walsh's West Coast offense. What separated Craig from other backs was his ability to dominate both as a rusher and receiver, and he did it at a level that was ahead of its time. In 1985, Craig became the first player in NFL history to record both 1,000 rushing yards and 1,000 receiving yards in the same season. That year, he put up 1,050 rushing yards and 1,016 receiving yards with 15 total touchdowns. No running back had ever shown that kind of dual threat ability before, and it completely changed how defenses had to game plan. Over his career, Craig rushed for 81-89 yards and 56 touchdowns while adding 566 receptions for 49-11 yards and 17 receiving scores. That's over 13,000 total yards from scrimmage, and he did it while being a 4-time Pro Bowler and first-team All-Pro in 1988. Craig was also a huge reason the 49ers won 3 Super Bowls during the 80s. He wasn't just productive in the regular season, he was clutch when it mattered most. In the 1988 playoffs, he rushed for over 260 yards in 3 games and scored 3 touchdowns to help carry San Francisco to another championship. His high knee running style became iconic because it gave him leverage to bounce off tackles and keep churning forward for extra yards. Despite all of this, Roger Craig still isn't in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, which is absolutely ridiculous. Meanwhile, guys like Marcus Allen and Thurman Thomas, who Craig compares favorably to statistically, get celebrated far more often. The truth is, Craig was a prototype for the modern all-purpose running back. He did what guys like Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler do now, except he was doing it in the 80s when nobody else was playing that way. His influence on how the position evolved is undeniable, and his consistent excellence during one of the greatest dynasties in NFL history makes his lack of recognition one of the biggest oversights in football. At number 5, we have Thurman Thomas, and this one really bothers me because Thomas was literally an MVP and still gets underrated. When people think about the Buffalo Bills of the early 90s, they remember the 4 straight Super Bowl appearances and the 4 heartbreaking losses. But the engine that made that entire offense run was Thurman Thomas, and he doesn't get nearly enough credit for it. Drafted in the second round of 1988, Thomas earned AFC Offensive Player of the Year honors in both 1989 and 1990. Then in 1991, he won the NFLMV award, which is incredibly rare for a running back. From 89 to 92, Thomas led the entire NFL in yards from scrimmage 4 straight years, which shows you just how dominant he was at his peak. Thomas finished his 13-year career with 12,074 rushing yards and 65 touchdowns, plus 472 receptions for 4,458 yards and 23 receiving scores. That's over 16,500 total yards from scrimmage, putting him among the top backs in league history. He was the ultimate dual threat who could run between the tackles, bounce outside with speed, or catch passes out of the backfield in Buffalo's no-huddle attack. In the playoffs, Thomas played 21 games and rushed for over 1,400 yards while scoring 21 total touchdowns. In Super Bowl 25, he had 135 rushing yards, a touchdown, and 5 catches for 55 yards, nearly carrying Buffalo to victory before Scott Norwood's missed field goal. Despite being a 5-time Pro Bowler, 2-time All-Pro, NFL MVP, and Hall of Famer, Thomas is still somehow underrated. Why? Because his career is unfairly tied to those Super Bowl losses. The shadow of those 4 defeats has dimmed what should be recognized as one of the greatest careers ever. Thomas wasn't just great for his era, he was revolutionary. He was a true all-purpose back, whose versatility influenced how modern offenses use running backs today, and his legacy deserves way more spotlight in conversations about the best to ever do it. Number 4 is Priest Holmes, and this man had one of the most dominant 3-year peaks any running back has ever experienced. Holmes went undrafted out of Texas in 1997 and started his career as a backup in Baltimore, where he won a Super Bowl in 2000. But when he signed with Kansas City in 2001, everything changed. In his first season as a featured back, Holmes led the entire NFL in rushing with 1,555 yards, despite never being a full-time starter before. Then from 2001 to 2003, Holmes put up numbers that were absolutely stupid. Over that 3-year stretch, he rushed for 4,590 yards, caught passes for 1,584 more yards, and scored 61 total touchdowns. In 2003 alone, he scored 27 rushing touchdowns, which set the single-season record at the time. Holmes had incredible vision and patience as a runner. He would wait for blocks to develop, then explode through tiny creases that other backs couldn't even see. Running behind that Chiefs offensive line with Hall of Famers Willie Roaf and Will Shields, Holmes was absolutely unstoppable. He wasn't just a rusher either. He was dangerous, catching passes out of the backfield and kept defenses constantly guessing. Unfortunately, a devastating hip injury in 2005 basically ended his career at its peak. He tried to come back in 2007 but was never the same player. Still, Holmes finished with 8,172 rushing yards, 86 rushing touchdowns, and 339 receptions for 2,962 receiving yards. What makes Holmes so underrated is how quickly people forgot just how untouchable he was during that peak. For 3 straight years, he was arguably the most feared offensive weapon in the entire league, even more dominant than guys like Marshall Faulk. The fact that he went from undrafted free agent to Offensive Player of the Year makes his story even more incredible. Priest Holmes' career might have been cut short, but his peak was as good as anyone who's ever played the position. Coming in at number 3 is Shaun Alexander, and talk about a guy whose legacy faded fast. Alexander got drafted 19th overall by Seattle in 2000 and spent nearly a decade as one of the most consistent and productive backs in football. His peak in the mid-2000s was absolutely ridiculous, especially 2005 when he rushed for 1,880 yards and set the NFL single-season record with 27 rushing touchdowns. That season, Alexander won the MVP award, becoming the first Seahawk ever to win it, and he led Seattle to their first Super Bowl appearance. From 2001 to 2005, Alexander rushed for over 1,100 yards every single season and scored at least 14 touchdowns each year. He finished his career with 9,453 rushing yards, 100 rushing touchdowns, and 12 receiving scores, making him one of only 8 backs ever to hit the century mark in rushing touchdowns. The problem with Alexander's legacy is how quickly things fell apart after his MVP season. Injuries hit, key offensive linemen left, and by 2007, he wasn't the same dominant force anymore. Critics also point out that his peak was relatively short compared to guys like LaDainian Tomlinson or Adrian Peterson. But here's what people forget: during his prime, Alexander was one of the most dangerous red zone threats in NFL history. Defenses knew he was getting the ball near the goal line and still couldn't stop him. His combination of vision, power, and nose for the end zone made him a touchdown machine. Running behind Walter Jones and Steve Hutchinson definitely helped, but Alexander still had to make plays, and he delivered year after year. His MVP season and touchdown dominance prove he belongs in any conversation about underrated backs. At number 2, we've got Brian Westbrook, and this dude was way ahead of his time. Drafted in the 3rd round by Philadelphia in 2002, Westbrook entered the league without much hype, but quickly became one of the most versatile and dangerous playmakers of the decade. At 5'10" and 203 pounds, he didn't have traditional size, but he more than made up for it with quickness, vision, and elite receiving skills. Westbrook could line up anywhere on the field, run between the tackles, beat defenders to the edge, catch passes out of the slot, and even return kicks. He was a matchup nightmare that defenses couldn't solve. His best season came in 2007 when he recorded 1,333 rushing yards, 771 receiving yards, and 12 total touchdowns. He led the entire NFL in yards from scrimmage that year with 21-14, showcasing just how vital he was to Andy Reid's offense. Westbrook finished his career with 6,335 rushing yards, 41 rushing touchdowns, 442 receptions for 3940 yards, and 30 receiving touchdowns. That's over 10,000 yards from scrimmage and 71 total scores, numbers that easily compare to more celebrated backs from his era. He also had a knack for clutch plays, like his 81-yard punt return touchdown against the Giants in the 2003 playoffs that remains one of the most iconic moments in Eagles history. Why is Westbrook underrated? Partly because he wasn't built like a traditional bell cow back, and partly because he played in the same era as LaDainian Tomlinson, Shaun Alexander, and Clinton Portis, who overshadowed him. But his impact on the passing game paved the way for today's dual threat backs like Christian McCaffrey and Alvin Kamara. Westbrook was a game changer whose value went way beyond the box score. And finally, at number 1, the most underrated running back in NFL history is Steven Jackson. This man spent the majority of his career as one of the most complete, durable, and productive backs in the league. But because he played on terrible Rams teams, his greatness got completely buried. St. Louis drafted Jackson 24th overall in 2004, and he spent his career as a rare combination of size, strength, and agility at 6'2" and 240. He could run through defenders, had the speed to break off big plays, and the hands to contribute heavily in the passing game. Taking over for Marshall Faulk, Jackson immediately proved himself worthy, and by his second season, he started a streak of 8 straight 1,000-yard rushing seasons from 2005 to 2012. His best year was 2006 when he rushed for 1,528 yards, added 860 receiving yards on 90 catches, and scored 16 total touchdowns. That season, he led the entire NFL in yards from scrimmage with 2334, cementing his status as an elite weapon. Over 12 years, Jackson rushed for 11,438 yards and 69 touchdowns while adding 461 receptions for 3,683 yards and 9 more scores. That's over 15,000 total yards from scrimmage, ranking him among the top backs in history. Despite these incredible numbers, he only made 3 Pro Bowls and never got the national recognition his production deserved. The reason Jackson is so underrated is simple: team success. During his prime, the Rams were awful and consistently posted losing records. Without playoff appearances or Super Bowl runs to showcase his talents on the biggest stages, Jackson's accomplishments got overlooked. But make no mistake, Steven Jackson was one of the most complete backs of his generation. A bruising runner, skilled receiver, and the definition of consistency. He carried those Rams teams on his back year after year with no help around him, and that's exactly why he's the most underrated running back in NFL history. So there you have it, 10 absolute legends who deserve way more respect than they get. These guys put up Hall of Fame numbers, changed how the position was played, and dominated for years, but somehow their names don't come up enough in greatest of all time debates. Which one of these players do you think is the most underrated? Drop your answer in the comments and let me know if I missed anybody. And if you made it this far, hit that like button and subscribe, because we're gonna keep diving into NFL history and bringing these forgotten legends back into the conversation where they belong.